Hi, it's Rod McBain, and we're looking at the original intent of those who ratified our Constitution. We've seen the basics of government, and we've seen the basis of power, and now we'll see the talk about the basic form of government. And this form exists, doesn't matter whether it's a tribal nation group or whether it's a kingdom. It doesn't matter actually if it's a republic or a socialist government. It doesn't matter if it's a empire. Every time you have a government, and that includes any churches that get put together, anytime you have a association because of academics, the military, science, whatever associations you have, you'll find this form. And I'll use in describing it England in large extent, but you can find this in all governments, all groups of people coming together. The primary thing you'll have is a group of leaders or a leader. And historically, if we read, this is someplace between 1 and 7 people. Sometimes more, but generally that's where it falls. Below and outside of this, you have a group of lords, barons. And this is set up in a hierarchy with lower lords all the way up to the higher lords. And they'll have a duke, and then maybe you'll have a baron or a lord. You'll have a marquise. When you look at the list of all of these different groupings, there are just multiple divisions, and one has to bow down to the next, more or less. This group, though, is generally not a huge percentage of the people, maybe 17% at the most. And generally, the rest of the people are far below this group in prestige, power, in their ability to move about. They work for this upper group. There is a group of people who I call the close servants and artisans that serve this group. And because of their close relationship, they somewhat share in the wealth. Not really, it's not theirs, but it just kind of rubs off on them in a sense because they're right next to them. And in some cases, they get portions of it. Again, true Christians are what change this society and generally where you end up with a middle class. The bottom level is again a hierarchy with people at the very bottom, and generally that's the slaves, although slaves were often higher in position than many others, depending on the society. And then basically you move up through that to different kinds of serfs, peasants, workers, this type of thing. The artisans would fall into that higher class, and that might include metal workers, that might include woodworkers, people who have real artistic ability. And a lot of what I'm talking about, I'm speaking in terms of the old feudal systems, and that's where land and the food that was produced was the center of control and power. Remembering that what you're trying to control is the believing of the people, you then are starting to control what are the things you need to control that believing. And for years, that was the land. The king owned the land. The lords controlled the land that they were assigned to. Everyone had to either work for them as a servant, a slave, or as a renter. And that's how that worked. As you move into the industrial age, that changes, and we'll get into that in the next segment. But this foundational form exists in tribal people with sub-chiefs and chiefs. It's not nearly as dynamic in terms of the difference between those in tribes as it is with those in perhaps a kingdom or an empire, where you have people who have just amazing wealth and power, so far different from the people at the very bottom. So that's the basis then of the type of culture. It's always existed this way, and it always will. no matter what you do, you end up with this one way or the other. It doesn't have to affect you. You actually can live outside of that and with it, right along with it, and yet not controlled by it. So that's that. Hopefully this is helpful. We'll come back. We're going to start to look at the different forms of government after we went to the industrial age, what they are, and basically what the differences are in their effect. But hopefully this is helpful.